All right, kittens. This one is dark. What starts as a dream opportunity quickly spirals into something deeply unsettling. And by the end, you won't know what or who to believe. Verity opens in New York City with Lowen Ashley on her way to meet her literary agent. And from this very first scene, Colleen Hoover wastes absolutely no time throwing us into chaos. Lowen witnesses a horrifying hit and run that leaves a man dead right in front of her. And immediately, this leaves the story feeling bloodstained and unsettling to the max. In the middle of all that trauma, a stranger steps in to help her, Jeremy Crawford. And yes, the chemistry is instant. They bond over grief, loss, and that strange emotional intimacy that happens when two broken people recognize something familiar in each other. But right away, there's a red flag waving in the wind. Jeremy is married. And then comes our first wait, what? They arrive at the same meeting. What are the chances? Jeremy's wife is the Verity Crawford, the best selling author behind the wildly successful Noble Virtue series. But after a devastating accident, she can no longer finish the books. Lowen is offered the chance to step in and complete the final installments for a life changing amount of money. And honestly, given the fact that she's facing eviction, it makes sense that she says yes, even though this entire setup already feels like the opening chapter of a nightmare. So off she goes to the Crawford house in Vermont. And kittens, this is where the gothic thriller energy really kicks in. The house is drenched in grief. It feels heavy, claustrophobic, almost haunted by everything this family has lost. Jeremy's young son, Crew, is the only surviving child, and upstairs lies Verity herself, silent, motionless, and seemingly trapped inside her own body. But if you're anything like me, this is the point where my little whiskers start twitching because something feels off. While searching Verity's office for notes, Lowen finds a manuscript that was never meant to be seen. At first, it seems like an autobiography, but what unfolds on those pages is far darker. It reads like a confession, raw, intimate, and deeply disturbing. We get the story of Verity and Jeremy's marriage, their obsessive relationship, and then the birth of the twins, Harper and Chasten. And this is where the book starts to crawl under your skin, because Verity's thoughts toward her children are not just cold, they're terrifying. The deeper Lowen reads, the darker the house seems to become. She starts believing Verity may be responsible for the deaths of her daughters. And at the same time, strange things begin happening around the house. Lowen catches moments where she swears Verity is watching her. This is the kind of psychological tension that makes you question every creak in the floorboards. Is Verity really incapacitated? Or is someone in the house playing a much more dangerous game? Meanwhile, and because, of course, this book loves chaos, the emotional tension between Lowen and Jeremy keeps escalating. Their connection turns intimate, and the line between comfort, attraction, and danger starts to blur. Personally, this is where I was fully yelling at the pages because absolutely no one in this house is making good choices, like at all. Then we reach the manuscript's most horrifying revelations. Verity's growing hatred towards Harper, the attempted harm when the twins were babies, and finally, the chilling account of Harper's death at the lake. One fine afternoon, Verity, Cruz, and Harper are out on the lake behind their house in a small boat. In the manuscript, Verity states that while Harper was distracted, she yells out, "Cruz, hold your breath," and capsizes the boat. Absolutely wild. Of course, you already know she took her time saving crews. And by the time she was quote unquote ready to save Harper, she had already drowned. Horrific. By this point, Lowen is convinced she's living in the same house as a killer. And honestly, so was I. Everything finally explodes when Lowen gives the manuscript to Jeremy. Faced with what reads like a written confession, Jeremy confronts Verity. And Kittens, this is where the story fully crosses into morally black territory. He snaps in a rage and begins strangling her, convinced that the woman lying in that bed is responsible for the deaths of his daughters. But then comes one of the darkest moments in the entire novel. Lowen stops him, not to save Verity, but to stop Jeremy from leaving obvious signs of murder. And what she suggests next is chilling. She tells him to kill Verity the same way the manuscript claims Verity once tried to kill Harper as a baby. Jeremy forces Verity to vomit and then covers her mouth and nose, making her choke and suffocate on it, staging it to look like she died in her sleep, choking on her own vomit. And this is the moment where every moral line in the story completely collapses. We are no longer dealing with heroes and villains. We are watching grief, obsession, and fear turn everyone into something monstrous. What makes this scene so powerful is the symmetry of it. But that symmetry hinges entirely on one chilling question. What if the manuscript is true? If it is, then Jeremy's actions become a twisted form of justice, mirroring the same calculated, horrifying way Verity once tried to harm her own child. It transforms the moment into something almost poetic in its cruelty, brutal, cyclical, and deeply unsettling. But if the manuscript is false, then everything shifts. What we're witnessing isn't justice. It's manipulation, grief, and blind trust curdling into something irreversible. And that's where it gets even darker. Lowen doesn't just stand on the sidelines. She becomes complicit. Her belief in the manuscript, whether justified or not, directly influences what happens next. She isn't just a witness to the violence. She helps shape it, rationalize it, and ultimately allow it. At this point, we are way past red flags. We are in a full crimson parade, where truth is blurred, morality is fractured, and every choice feels just as dangerous as the last. But Verity saves its sharpest claws for the final twist. Months later, Lowen discovers a hidden letter from Verity to Jeremy. In it, Verity claims the manuscript was never a confession at all, but an antagonistic writing exercise, a way to slip into the mind of someone so evil without ever becoming a true monster. And just like that, everything fractures. Every assumption, every justification, every horrifying moment we thought we understood suddenly feels so unstable, like the ground has been pulled out from under us. So now we have to ask the question that lingers, like a shadow you can't shake. Was Verity ever the monster, or was she made into one? Was Jeremy protecting his family, or rewriting the narrative to survive his grief? Or maybe the most unsettling truth of all, Lowen didn't uncover the story. She chose it. Because, Kittens, that final decision to destroy the letter isn't just suspicious, it's damning. It's the moment truth stops mattering. It's the moment a narrative becomes more important than reality. It's the moment Lowen doesn't just inherit Verity's story. She buries it, reshapes it, and ensures we'll never know what really happened. And that's not just dark. That's irredeemable. Now that we've walked through the blood-stained corridors of this story, it's time to turn our focus to the people at its center. Because Verity doesn't just unsettle us with what happens, but with who allows it to happen. Every character is morally compromised, emotionally fractured, and impossible to fully trust. And there's no better place to start than Lowen. Lowen Ashley is such an interesting protagonist because she doesn't enter the story from a place of strength. She enters it already fractured. She's 32, grieving the loss of her mother to cancer, financially desperate, and emotionally isolated. Before she ever steps foot into the Crawford house, she's already carrying trauma. That matters because it means she's not exactly a neutral observer. What I find so compelling about Lowen is that she's deeply unreliable, but not in that classic thriller sense where she's obviously lying. Instead, her unreliability comes from fear, grief, and self doubt. She questions herself constantly, and that makes us question everything right alongside her. The move from New York to the Crawford estate in Vermont almost acts like a psychological trap. She goes from the anonymity of city life into this suffocating, grief soaked house where every hallway feels haunted. And the more time she spends there, the more her own internal fears start to bleed into what she thinks she's seeing. I also think Lowen's growing relationship with Jeremy is crucial to understanding her. Her feelings for him cloud her judgment, and that emotional attachment starts influencing how she interprets Verity, the manuscript, and ultimately the truth itself. Now, let's turn to Jeremy Crawford, because beneath the surface of grief and quiet devotion, there's something far more unsettling lurking. On the surface, Jeremy is presented as the devoted husband and protective father. He's carrying immense loss after the deaths of both of his daughters, and his entire world seems to revolve around protecting Crew, his only surviving child. But what makes Jeremy fascinating is how grief transforms into control and then into violence. His connection with Lowen is immediate, and because they bond through shared trauma, it almost feels emotionally justified at first. But the deeper the story goes, the more we see that Jeremy's need to protect can quickly become something much darker. He doesn't just mistrust Verity, he fully convinces himself that he understands the truth. And that certainty is what makes him so dangerous. Because once he believes Verity is guilty, he feels morally justified in taking violent action. What's terrifying is that he carries very little guilt afterwards, because in his mind, what he did was justice. That opens up such an unsettling question. Is Jeremy a grieving father pushed to the edge? Or was the capacity for violence always there? And he just needed that little extra push for it to come out. And finally, Verity. Honestly, Verity might be one of the most psychologically fascinating characters that we've covered so far. For most of the novel, she exists almost like a ghost haunting the story. She's physically present, but silent, motionless, and terrifying in the way that only someone almost absent can be. Through the manuscript, we're given this portrait of Verity as obsessive, manipulative, hypersexual, and terrifyingly detached from motherhood. She becomes the embodiment of the monstrous mother archetype. But then the final letter forces us to reconsider everything. Was that version of Verity ever real? Or was it simply the product of an author exploring the darkest corners of the human mind? That's what makes her so brilliant as a character. Her power comes entirely through words. Even immobilized, even dead, Verity still controls the story. Her writing shapes Lowen's perception, Jeremy's actions, and ultimately the entire fate of the household. In the end, Verity's most dangerous weapon isn't violence. It's the story she leaves behind and the way it reshapes everyone who reads it. Before we head into our Colon Order segment and start really diving into the nuances of all of the dark and twisted and evil things that happen in this book, I want to talk about the mind behind Verity. Because understanding how this book was composed makes it even more fascinating in our Behind the Claws segment. Let's talk about Colleen Hoover. If you've ever spent any time in the book world, especially on Book Talk, you already know that Colleen Hoover is a literary force. She's one of the most commercially successful contemporary artists of the last decade, with multiple novels dominating the New York Times bestseller list, including November 9th, It Ends With Us, and Without Merit. What makes her rise especially interesting is that much of her early success came through self publishing before traditional publishers picked up her work. Before becoming a full time writer, Hoover worked in social work and education, which adds such an interesting layer when you look at the emotional intensity of her books. A lot of her stories are deeply centered on trauma, grief, relationships, and the way people emotionally unravel under pressure. What makes Verity stand out in her catalog is that it marks a striking shift in genre. Much of Hoover's earlier work leans heavily into contemporary romance and emotionally driven relationship drama. But Verity, published in 2018, takes that emotional intimacy and drags it into full psychological thriller territory. And I am here for it. And honestly, that's part of why this book is so attractive to such a large audience. She takes the emotional closeness and obsession that romance readers are used to and just twists it into something dangerous and addicting. Instead of asking, will these characters fall in love? The question becomes, who can we really trust? That shift is what makes this novel so addictive. This is also where one of the darkest themes in Verity really sinks its claws in: the writer as both creator and destroyer. Because, yes, this book is a thriller, but it's also deeply about what stories do. Both Lowen and Verity are writers, and Hoover mirrors them in ways that feel almost eerie. The more you sit with it, the more they begin to look like distorted reflections of each other. They're both isolated women in the same house. They both have locks placed outside their bedroom doors. They even share unsettling physical details, like the teeth marks on the bedposts. None of that feels accidental. Hoover is constantly doubling them. It's as if Lowen is slowly becoming Verity's shadow, and eventually, her replacement. Verity's writing quite literally built her world. Her success gave her the beautiful home, the status, the life with Jeremy, and the children. But the darkest irony is that her writing also destroys that same world. Whether the manuscript is true or a work of fiction, her words become the weapon that turns Jeremy against her. Her writing doesn't just tell a story, it causes chaos and death. That's what makes the manuscript so terrifying. It's emotionally convincing enough to function like a confession, even if it was only ever meant to be an exercise in exploring darkness, guilt, and trauma. The words become more powerful than reality. And honestly, that may be the most terrifying idea in the entire novel. And then there's Lowen. What makes her arc so fascinating is that she begins the story almost diminished. She's grieving, financially desperate, and creatively stunted. At the beginning, she feels like someone living in the margins of her own life. But by the end, she has stepped fully into Verity's place. She becomes the writer of Verity's books, She becomes Jeremy's partner. She becomes pregnant with Jeremy's child. In one reading, this is empowerment. Lowen finally claims a life, a career, and a sense of agency. But there's another, much darker reading. It almost feels vampiric. She doesn't build something entirely new. She inserts herself into the life Verity created. She steps into the empty spaces left behind. And the most chilling part is that she helps create those empty spaces. By encouraging Jeremy to kill Verity, Lowen doesn't just replace her emotionally. She helps erase her physically. That's what makes this theme so dark. Creation and destruction are constantly intertwined. That same skill that made Verity powerful as a writer becomes the thing that destroys her. And the same emotional vulnerability that makes Lowen sympathetic is also what allows her to step into another woman's life. By the end, the question isn't just who told the truth, it's who ultimately became the destroyer. And kittens, that brings us perfectly into today's Claw and Order. Because the fear this book taps into isn't just fictional. It echoes some of the darkest real world cases involving motherhood, trauma, and how quickly society decides who the monster is. I wanted to talk about a real case that echoes one of the darkest themes in Verity: the fear and horror surrounding motherhood turned deadly. And one case that powerfully mirrors this theme is Andrea Yates. In 2001, Andrea Yates, a mother from Texas, drowned her 5 children in the bathtub of her home. It's one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking cases in modern true crime. But what makes it especially relevant to Verity is that this case forces us to confront the line between evil and illness. At the time, Yates had been suffering from severe postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, along with schizophrenia. Her mental state had been deteriorating for months, and doctors had reportedly warned against leaving her alone with the children. She was initially convicted, but after a retrial in 2006, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And this is where the parallel to Verity gets really dark. Throughout the novel, the manuscript positions Verity as this almost inhumane mother figure, cold, resentful, and capable of harming her own children. It plays directly into one of our deepest cultural fears: the idea of a mother becoming the threat inside the home. But the Andrea Yates case reminds us that real life is often far more complicated than a simple villain narrative. Was she a monster? Or was she a woman experiencing a catastrophic mental health crisis? That same tension is exactly what makes Verity so unsettling. The book asks us whether we're reacting to evidence or to the horror of the idea itself. Because, let's be honest, the image of a mother harming her child is one of the darkest things we can imagine. And authors know that. Colleen Hoover weaponizes that fear throughout the manuscript, forcing us to immediately distrust Verity. But then the letter at the end flips everything. Suddenly, we have to ask ourselves, did we believe Verity was capable of it because the evidence was convincing? Or because the story tapped into one of our most primal fears? That's what makes both this case and this novel so psychologically disturbing. They force us to examine how quickly we decide who the monster is. Thank you so much for tuning into Murder Mitten Kittens Book Club. I appreciate each and every one of you more than you will ever know. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to become part of my Murder Mitten Kitten colony and never miss an episode. I am so thankful I get to share my storytelling and analytical analysis of these dark, twisted thrillers. It has been such a fun journey to learn and to grow and to also read so many more books that I'm so excited to do episodes on. So definitely stay tuned for that. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Murder Mitten Kittens BC. or YouTube for the video format, which is just the audio recording, as of now, at Murder Mitten Kittens Book Club. And you can also stream my podcasts anywhere you get your podcasts: Apple Podcast, Amazon Prime Music, Spotify, all of that good stuff. Alrighty, kittens. Stay safe, stay cozy, and maybe don't trust every story you read. And remember, always be kind. I'll see you next time.